Hello there, good evening everyone, and welcome back to part 3 of the Hartmann's memoir, Our Life with Mr. Gurdjieff. Just very quickly, in yesterday's reading, part 2, we got a general introduction from Thomas to Hartmann, and then both Thomas and Olga's accounts of their first interactions, their first meetings with Gurdjieff. Always very powerful in all of these workbooks and memoirs when an individual first makes contact with Gurdjieff physically, because of course they all take something very different away. As we learn and read, Gurdjieff could put many different masks on and give the impression that he would choose, and so that's where we left it off. And then there was a trip to Essentuki, the first expedition, where there was different trials and challenges for each of the individuals. And now we arrive at chapter 3, which is titled Typhoid. And that is because, spoiler alert, Thomas de Hartmann contracts typhoid. And if you're enjoying our read through this memoir and many Gurdjieff texts and commentaries to come, as always, like the video, subscribe to the channel, share the show with everyone you know and on your social medias. But for now, chapter 3, Typhoid. So in Uk-Dare we opened the wooden gate and found ourselves in paradise. But we were not given long to admire it, because Mr. Gurdjieff immediately plunged us into a whirlwind of new work. When we went to put our luggage in the room he had assigned to us, my wife and I found that to enter our room we had to pass through his own room. In the daytime this would be no problem, but at night, however, we noticed there was a window close to the ground, so we could manage to use it instead of a door. And hello there, David. Hello and welcome. It's nice to see you. Zakharov and I were immediately given the job of cleaning out the sheds. There was one for horses and another filled with hay. We had to toss this hay into the loft. It was full of thorns, but we had to thrust our arms deep into it. We did not pay attention to the scratches, however, for the intensity and tempo of work had been established. Before sunset, the hay was removed. Returning to the house, I saw a tree of beautiful Hungarian plums, which are very sweet and have a pit that comes out easily. A few days earlier, Mr. Gurdjieff had warned us about eating fruit, recommending that we eat pears and not plums. I was sure he meant that we should avoid the fruit bought in the market because it could be contaminated by handling, and there was a serious typhoid epidemic in the area. But I felt that fruit was from a tree would be safe. The following day we went about 10 versts with Mr. Gurdjieff to buy live chickens, and on the way back I had to hold them in my hands as there was no basket. This was another awful job requiring constant attention, because one or another of the chickens was always struggling to get away and then go catch it. I held them by the legs, and very soon my hands were covered with fresh chicken droppings. It was not at all pleasant, and to add to my discomfort, a physical weakness was coming over me. When we got to the house, Mr. Gurdjieff killed and dressed the chickens himself. Zakharov and I stood nearby, ready to help him if needed, for we thought we could learn something from whatever he did. During the night I began to feel quite ill, with a pounding headache and a sort of dysentery, but the next day Mr. Gurdjieff forced me to overlook my illness and to stay on my feet and be active. Much later, when I had recovered, he told me that because of this activity I had stored up certain forces that had helped me to fight my serious disease. I went with him to bring fruit from Sochi that day, and we stayed there for lunch. On the way back I lay down in the Lineyka. The illness was progressing. Mr. Gurdjieff asked me what was the matter, and I told him how I felt and that I was trying to connect myself with him in my thoughts. "Good, Toma, good," he said. The next day, after a sleepless night, my head burning with fever, my wife saw that it was absolutely necessary to find another house for us nearby. It was really not possible for anyone as ill as I was to stay in a room with only one bed and no comfort whatsoever, and then we could have with us our maid, Marfusha, who was still in Tuapse. Luckily, just across the road my wife found an empty house, which the caretaker said belonged to Dr. Botkin, the Tsar's private physician. Dr. Botkin had followed the Tsar into exile in Siberia. He was later killed at the same time as the Tsar and his family. The caretaker was occupying the house, but he said there was another little house in the garden which we could rent if we wished. It was a wonderful little house, literally submerged in enormous roses, with steps covered with green moss leading down to the sea and a lane lined with cypresses. I was nearly unconscious when we moved in, but I saw those wonderful roses, and for me this paradise of beauty has remained associated ever since with an unbearable headache. My wife had telegraphed Marfusha to pack our things and come at once, and very soon she arrived. I started to lose consciousness, so what followed I gathered from my wife when I regained full consciousness 3 weeks later. Next morning Mr. Gurdjieff came to visit us, and seeing that I was much worse, told my wife to take Marfusha and go to buy food and everything necessary while he stayed with me. When they returned, Mr. Gurdjieff was sitting on the veranda, his face as white as his suit, and to the anxious questions of my wife he answered, "Now he sleeps. I have no more fear for his head, but we have to take him to hospital, as we have absolutely nothing here, not even a thermometer. Later you will see that this is important for other reasons also." He added, "I will go immediately to Sochi to find a hospital, and later we will take him there together." Mr. Gurdjieff left. I woke up and it began. In my delirium I wanted to run away. At one time, when my wife went to fetch something from the next room, I jumped out of bed and was halfway out the low window before she could stop me. She had literally to drag me back. With Marfusha's help, she put me back in bed with a hot water bottle, though for that she could find nothing better than an old wine bottle. When she lifted me up in bed, I caught her wrist and almost broke it. And when she wouldn't let me get out of bed, I took the bottle and tried to hit her on the head with it. In the evening, things went from bad to worse. Zakharov came to help, and even he, together with the caretaker, my wife and Marfusha, could not hold me down in bed. My wife was in despair, not knowing what to do, and Mr. Gurdjieff did not come and did not come. Zakharov kept going out to the road to watch for him, and finally, about midnight, he returned. I was asleep, but when Mr. Gurdjieff came into my room, I woke up at once and threw myself at him with such unexpected violence that I overturned a table with burning candles on it, and Mr. Gurdjieff nearly fell down. But the moment he put his hand on my forehead, I became quite peaceful, and although I did not fall asleep again, I was quiet. Mr. Gurdjieff decided that as soon as the sun was up they would take me to Sochi, and that he himself would drive, going very slowly to avoid the bumps. My wife and Marfusha packed everything and dressed me. At 5 in the morning Mr. Gurdjieff arrived with 2 carts. He put a mattress in one of them so that I could lie on it full length. He carried me to it and tied me down with a clothesline, my head towards the horses. He drove, and my wife sat at my feet. Marfusha and the luggage followed in the other cart. When I moved, Mr. Gurdjieff just said, "Toma, Toma," putting his hand on my forehead, and I would become quiet. But at one time I was so unexpectedly restless that I broke the rope. Slowly we made the 22 versts to Sochi. Some of the passers-by threw flowers on me, thinking that I was dead, for my lips were blue, and I looked quite stiff in my military uniform. Because of the raging epidemic of typhoid, not one of the hospitals in Sochi had an empty bed. Mr. Gurdjieff had been able to find a room only in a home for convalescent officers. We spent the night there, and in the morning doctors came to visit the patients. After examining me, they told my wife that they could not keep me a moment longer because I had typhoid, which is highly contagious. My wife had to look for another place, but there was none. The situation was desperate until finally one of the doctors located a free bed in a little country hospital several versts from Sochi, and we had no choice but to take it. It was a tiny hospital, and my bed was in a room with 3 others. Mr. Gurdjieff left as soon as I was installed, but my wife stayed with me. Of the men in the other 3 beds, one had scarlet fever, another diphtheria, and the third typhoid. The doctor saw to it that I was bathed immediately to lower my fever and given all necessary medication, after which I fell into a profound sleep. Then he told my wife that he could not allow her to stay in the hospital and asked where he could reach her in case of emergency, but she refused to leave. He insisted that there was no room for her, not even anything to sit on, and in no case could he permit anyone to stay in a hospital for contagious diseases. She replied that she would not leave and, if necessary, would stay in the garden. The doctor finally said it was no use quarrelling with such a stubborn woman and let her stay. Before he left, he even put a stool at my bedside. Earlier, Mr. Gurdjieff had urged her to go to a hotel where he had reserved a room for her and get some sleep, for she had not slept for 4 nights, but she remained in the hospital. Much later, Mr. Gurdjieff said that it was then that he had begun to look at her differently. It was September, and by 9 o'clock it was pitch dark. About 11, the doctor's assistant told my wife that my pulse was too low and I needed an injection of camphor, but that he had none and could not find our doctor or any other doctor, although he had telephoned everywhere. Again, the situation was desperate. The assistant said he could give me the injection himself if he had camphor. He pointed towards a feeble light in the distance among the trees, which he said was a military hospital where they would certainly have camphor. Since he had no right to leave the hospital, could my wife go and get it? The night was dark, as only nights in the south can be, but she ran. They listened to her at the military hospital, but she refused to treat anyone under another doctor's care. They listened to her at the military hospital, but refused to treat anyone under another doctor's care. Finally, after frantic persuasion, they understood that it was a matter of life and death, and one of the nurses urged to go herself and administer the injection if she saw that it was really necessary. Of course, she found that it was, and I was saved. In the morning, when the doctor came in, my wife asked him how he could have left without giving the assistant instructions. He answered, "I allowed you to stay only because I felt sure that your husband would not live through the night, and I hadn't the heart to send you away. Now, on the contrary, you saved his life." From then on, he became our friend and did everything he could for us. My wife managed to persuade one of the convalescent patients to move to a hotel room, which she paid for a week in advance, so that we could have a room to ourselves in the hospital and bring Marfusha to stay with us. It was very important to move me because of possible contagion from the others in the room I shared. It was wartime, and there were few sanitary precautions in such a little hospital. There were not even sheets to cover the hay-filled mattresses, and it was almost impossible to buy anything. After a long search, my wife bought some silk from a Chinese street merchant and made sheets and pillowcases. We did not need blankets because it was so hot. And hello there, everyone. Hello there, Graham. Graham says hi all. Sophia is listening and says hello to Graham and David, and it's lovely to have you all here. I hope you've had a pleasant day and are doing well. Mr. Gurdjieff, Dr. Sternwohl, and Mr. Mobaeus visited me. Mobaeus was a Marine officer, one of the pupils who had come from St. Petersburg. He spent the night in our room, for Mr. Gurdjieff now insisted that my wife get some sleep after 13 nights of watching over me. I was only semi-conscious and kept asking whether it was night or day, what was the time, and so on, for I could not sleep. Mr. Gurdjieff asked Dr. Sternwohl to write a prescription he himself dictated, and then told my wife to go to the pharmacy to get the medicine. When she gave the prescription to the chemist, he looked at it blankly and said that it did not specify any medicine, but just the sugar coating used on pills. She told him to make up the pills just the same. She understood what Mr. Gurdjieff intended, and he laughed when she reported the chemist's comment. But the pills helped me marvellously. I had nightmares continuously. One of them was that red musical notes were running through the room and would not leave me in peace. My wife tried to persuade me that there was nothing in the room, but it did not work. Suddenly, Marfusha said to my wife, very reproachfully, "How is it that you don't see them when the room is filled with them?" My wife thought, "Goodness me, now Marfusha is going mad." But Marfusha took her apron in one hand and with the other collected some imaginary things around the room. Then she went out and came back telling me that she had thrown all the red notes away, so now I could sleep peacefully. I slept and did not see them any more. A simple peasant who could scarcely read understood the problem better than my wife. It is interesting to experience the divided state of delirium. In one sense, I knew that there were no red notes and that Marfusha was pretending they were there, but her clever action quieted me completely. All that I remember from that period is naturally like a dream, and only certain moments come back to me. The view from the window on the right, where by day I could see the tops of yellowing autumn trees, the sound of the whistles of the Black Sea Railway locomotives, a bowl of kissel jelly with Bulgarian clotted cream. But I clearly recall how happy I was when Mr. Gurdjieff came to visit me. I always asked him to put his hand on my forehead. Before long, Mr. Gurdjieff went away with the other pupils to an estate of former St. Petersburg comrades of mine in the Cadet Corps. The estate was situated in Olginka, near Tuapse. It was very hard for my wife to be left alone, with me still so sick. One day when she returned from shopping, I asked her in a different voice, "Where am I?" And from that moment I began to recover. I was terribly thin and weak, so that she even had to turn me over in bed, saying that it was like holding a little chicken that was nothing but skin and bones. As it was difficult to buy anything nourishing, my energy came back very slowly, but the morning tea with sugar and 2 biscuits tasted wonderful, and we were happy that I was finally myself again. Further difficulties were looming. One day we received a letter from the manager of my estates. He said that the Bolshevik revolution had broken out and, because everything was being confiscated by the Bolsheviks, he was sending us the money we had been receiving monthly for the last time. The same mail brought me a letter from the engineering administration of the White Army asking what I would like to receive in payment for an invention of mine that had already been accepted and used by the army. It was a device similar to a periscope for sighting and firing rifles from the trenches without having to poke one's head over the top for snipers to shoot at. 300,000 of them had already been made. What irony! By the time I received this letter, the White Army was no longer in control, and I certainly would not receive any payment from the Bolsheviks. My wife and I were alone and weary in a little country hospital, and knowing what to do or not knowing what to do or when I would be able to move. And what of the future? We clung to one idea. Sooner or later we would join Mr. Gurdjieff again. That meant going to Tuapse as soon as I could walk. One day in November, when I could hardly stand on my feet, my wife returned from the post office with the news that the last train from Sochi to Tuapse would leave in 3 days because, with the onset of winter, the railway line was usually blocked by rocks, falls, and avalanches. On the 15th of November, the Sochi Medical Commission examined me and concluded that I needed a long convalescence before returning to military service. The doctor warned me to be very careful and not to move quickly, for I was still terribly weak. But we decided to take the last train. My wife went to buy the tickets and to reserve seats so that I would be able to lie down, but that was impossible. Finally, the post office staff promised her that they would make me a bed of mail bags in the mail car if we could be there when they loaded it at 5 in the morning, before the public arrived at the station. We were certainly there on time, and the postmen themselves carried me to the bed they had made, where I could stretch out with my wife and Marfusha beside me. These were among the many good people who helped us. In Tuapse we went to a hotel and luckily got the last room, but it had only one bed. What a wonderful sensation it was for me to lie in a real bed, a clean bed. Although my wife and Marfusha had to sleep on the floor, they too felt as if they were in a palace. The next day we located Mr. Gurdjieff, and he advised us to go to Essentuki as soon as I was able to travel. We had friends there and would find doctors and the medicines I needed. So in a few days we left for Essentuki. That journey was a nightmare. We had to change trains twice. We left Tuapse in a roomy compartment, but when our train reached Armavir, our first transfer station, it turned out that the train to Mineralnie Vodi was crammed with soldiers. There were no first-class cars and everything was in complete chaos. I thought that being an officer might only make things worse for us, but luckily there was a very kind woman soldier in the crowd who helped by ordering some soldiers to get up and let the sick comrade have a seat. 9 of us were crowded into that compartment, and my wife and Marfusha had to stand in the corridor, which was jammed with passengers and luggage. We reached Mineralnie Vodi after dark, and there we had to wait 3 hours for the train to Essentuki. My wife and Marfusha managed to fix a bed for me on a bench at the station. They covered me with my wife's mink coat, for the nights were now cold. When we finally reached Essentuki in the morning, we faced a similar problem. Not a single room in any hotel or in any of the many guest houses. Usually after the summer season, Essentuki and all the other resorts, towns in the Caucasus were emptied of everyone but the homeowners and other inhabitants. But now they were overcrowded as never before. Moscow and St. Petersburg were feeling the pinch of famine. Aristocrats, high government officials and wealthy, all who could, were pouring into this region where the land was good, provisions still plentiful, and they could escape the pursuit of the Bolsheviks. We somehow managed to find a temporary room in a private house. My military leave had expired long before, so official could ask to see my papers. Now we realized how wise Mr. Gurdjieff had been to insist on my going to a hospital. My hospital papers stated that, having had abdominal typhoid, I now suffered from anemia, exhaustion, and a weakened heart, and needed several months' rest. On the 18th of February 1918, with these same papers, I would be released from military service by a commission in nearby Pyatigorsk. I could then burn my uniform and become a civilian and a musician again. I would keep only my sword. The search for a place of our own in Essentuki led my wife and Marfusha to look on the outskirts of the city on the other side of the railway line, and there at last they found a tiny house. It lay in the back part of a property where the house in front was occupied by the owner, Manzavino, who also owned a fancy goods store in Kislovodsk. Beyond our house in the garden were empty stables. Still further back stood an unfinished, typically Caucasian 2-story house with all the rooms opening onto a veranda. Although as yet this house had no windows or doors, it was as if it had been waiting for us. And not only for us, because after Mr. Gurdjieff came to Essentuki in January 1918, he founded his institute there in the unfinished house. So 1918 was the first founding and official inception of the Institute for the Harmonious Development of Man. And of course, we'll learn all about it. Chapter 4, Back in Essentuki. Meanwhile, we began to live a peaceful life after so many difficult months. We telegraphed to Ossip to join us as soon as he could, and at last our little home was complete again. Marfusha resuming her place as cook and personal attendant to my wife, and Ossip as butler, and my military orderly. When I had gone to the front at the end of February, Ossip had refused to allow any other soldier to be my orderly, saying, "I will not let Mr. de Hartmann go to the front with a stranger." He had gone through everything with me behind the trenches, and when the soldiers mutinied, we escaped together on foot all the way to Kiev to join my wife. He and Marfusha were both children of older servants on our estate, and were devoted to us as to their own families. The thought of Mr. Gurdjieff and his plans never left us. Was he going to Persia, or would he stay in the Caucasus? In a few weeks a postcard from him arrived saying that he would like to come to Esentuki and asking if we could find a place for him. In another day or two we received a letter in which he enclosed 1,000 rubles, still a large sum, though inflation had begun, saying that he sent the money in case we needed it. We were deeply touched by his thoughtfulness. Later that same day we were happily surprised to see Mr. Gurdjieff standing at our door. For the next few nights he slept on the sofa in our tiny living room. He liked the place. The owner rented him a big room in his own house with the right to use the kitchen, and several days later Mr. Gurdjieff's wife arrived, and soon after the ch.3-4. I thought that interesting philosophical talks would begin now, but nothing of the sort happened. We just went for walks every day with Mr. Gurdjieff to the centre of Esentuki. He brought sunflower seeds, always giving me a handful, and would spit out the shells in front of passer-by. Not a word was said about philosophy, and I, impatient, walked at his side, not knowing how to ask a question. He often came to see us in the evening, and sometimes Dr. ch.3-4 came with him. Then at last the conversations became interesting. One evening Mr. Gurdjieff spoke at great length about the lack of precision in our language, how we are unable to transmit an idea or philosophical concept accurately, scarcely indeed to communicate at all with each other. Later Ouspensky developed this idea wonderfully, underlining the fact that our language is based on associative thinking, each word being coloured by all kinds of individual and subjective images, sensations, and thoughts. His exact transmission of Mr. Gurdjieff's ideas is all the more admirable in that during the Moscow and St. Petersburg period we were categorically forbidden to take any notes whatsoever. Later, in Esentuki and Tiflis, however, Mr. Gurdjieff told us to write down what was said by him, or to fulfill a writing task that he would give us, as, for instance, to find a suitable name for the institute and define its aim. This was a real head-breaking job, which thoroughly brought home to us the conversations with him about the inexactitude of language. The most interesting thing was that during this long search for possible definitions, our inner work was creating within us a taste for exact language. Even though we could not achieve it, at least we acquired an understanding that there are ideas, thoughts, and sensations that are almost impossible to put into words. One evening, just before leaving our little house, Mr. Gurdjieff said quite casually, "This is the last evening I will come to you, because I shall soon begin to work with the doctor." Oh God, how much these words hurt me. I thought he was about to begin extremely important esoteric work with Dr. ch.3-4, and that I would not be included because I was still very young in the work. All the next day I had no peace, and when I could bear it no longer, I told Mr. Gurdjieff how sad I was that I could not take part in the new work. "Why sad? You have to catch up," was his answer. When a vivid confrontation such as this one occurred, the mask fell from his face, and I felt the deep inner bond already established with him, a bond that grew stronger with the years. It was never a hypnotic tie, because all Mr. Gurdjieff's teaching leads men towards being free of suggestion. This inner tie, let us call it a magnetic tie, was an invisible bond with Mr. Gurdjieff, who was then the person nearest to one, in the true sense of the word. It was as if one then saw the real Mr. Gurdjieff with whom one wished to stay forever. This was the This was not the everyday Mr. Gurdjieff, who was sometimes agreeable, sometimes very disagreeable, a man one often wished to run away from, and with whom one stayed only because one's work depended on it. I recall that Mr. Gurdjieff once said that the soul, which has to be awakened in us, will be connected with the physical body by a magnetic bond. Through his work with us, he temporarily took the place of our soul, and so a magnetic bond had to be formed with him, which we recognized and which produced this feeling of nearness. One morning when I passed through the centre of Essentuki, I noticed a poster advertising a special evening at the social club and had the desire to sit peacefully in the corner watching people dance. Later in the day, when I walked with Mr. Gurdjieff and Dr. Sternvoll, I spoke of this quite casually. "Doctor, you hear? He's inviting us to go to the club this evening." "What? You will invite us for supper? Let's go, doctor. Thank you for your invitation." This was bad. A supper during the inflation cost a tremendous amount of money, and I no longer had any money coming in each month. But there was nothing for it but to go ahead with this plan, because I hadn't the courage to say no. That evening I took 500 rubles. In former times a supper in the best restaurant would come to no more than 2.5 rubles, and went to the club. It was almost empty. There was no dancing, and only the restaurant was open. Now my hell began. Mr. Gurdjieff played with me as if I were a child to whom he wished to teach a lesson. "Well, doctor, since he's treating us, come on. It would be nice to start with some vodka and hors d'oeuvres. Then later..." It went on and on. I vividly remember to this day the oranges he ordered, because then I knew that my 500 rubles would never pay the bill. I did not have the courage to tell Mr. Gurdjieff I didn't have enough money and ask him to lend me some until we got home. How could I get out of this situation? It was agonizing. Finally, I decided to tip the waiter and send him to my wife for more money. She was frightened when a stranger knocked at our door in the night, but finally the money was brought and I paid for everything. The bill came to about 1,000 rubles, enough for us to live on for half a month. Next morning, Mr. Gurdjieff came to see us and gave me the money I had spent on the supper. He said, "Sometimes you act like a lamb and the tigers will eat you up. It is good that you have a tigress near you." This was another extremely painful moment, not from the ordinary point of view, but because I realized that I did not know how to behave like a grown-up man. Mr. Gurdjieff told me several times, but only now did I believe it. That morning Mr. Gurdjieff was not at all as he had been the evening before. There were no reproaches, no raillery. All he said was that what had happened had been done for my sake. Now we come to a short passage from Olga de Hartmann. Olga says, "Quite unexpectedly for us in any case, a cart arrived one day with 8 people of Mr. Gurdjieff's family. His mother, his brother, Dmitri, with his wife and small child, his sister Sophia, with her fiancé, and a niece and nephew from 2 other sisters. Mr. Gurdjieff rented a house for them not far from us, where they could live until they were able to establish a new life. His father did not come. He wished to stay in his home in Alexandropol, where he was unfortunately killed later by the Turks on the porch of his house." Back to Thomas de Hartmann. "One day Dmitri Ivanovich brought in a large wineskin, and that evening we all gathered and drank a toast to Sofia Ivanovna and her fiancé Georgy Kapanadze, who were soon to be married. I had not seen Dmitri since my first meeting with Mr. Gurdjieff. He was the other man who came along. When the wedding took place, Mr. Gurdjieff arranged the wedding dinner, not in the spacious house of Manzavino, but in our little home, where everything was simple. We had a fine feast. A group of musicians called Sazandari, which is a musical ensemble of Transcaucasia, usually 3 performers playing tar, kiamancha and daria, one doubling as a singer, was invited to entertain us, which made it possible for us to hear real Eastern music. Next morning, the bridal couple came to the 2nd floor of our house, where Sophia sat down on a carpet and began to spin. This is an Eastern custom, symbolizing that the bride from the very first day and afterwards will work unceasingly. She was preparing yarn in order to weave a shirt for her husband. Life went on. We soon learned that Mr. Gurdjieff had arranged to rent the big house at the end of the garden, since the owner had decided to finish it. In February, he had his wife write letters to his people who were still in Moscow and St. Petersburg, telling them that anyone who wished to work could come to him in Essentuki. Meanwhile, we had to prepare everything to be ready to receive them. Beds, tables, chairs, and other necessities had to be bought. Time passed. The owner finished the house. The furniture began to arrive, and soon the house was livable. It was there also in February that I had my first experience of music with Mr. Gurdjieff in one of the numerous rooms where the pupils from Moscow and St. Petersburg were soon to live. In the evenings he began to come with a guitar that belonged to Manzavino, and lying on the tartar, an Eastern divan with cushions, he would play. There was no music like waltzes and mazurkas, which later on he used for our sacred gymnastics, and which, when I asked about them, he said they came from a study book for guitar. This music was quite another music. He played not in the usual manner, but with the tip of the 3rd finger, as if playing a mandolin, rather slightly rubbing the strings. There were only melodies, rather pianissimo hints of melodies, so that one had to listen closely to catch all the varieties of musical vibrations. These were surely reminiscences of melodies from the years when he collected and studied the ritual movements and dances of different temples in Asia. At the time he could not note down these numerous melodies on paper, but kept them in his memory. All this playing was essentially an introduction for me into the new character of the Eastern music that he wished later to dictate to me. For us, Essentuki can surely be called the cradle of Mr. Gurdjieff's music. Neither in Moscow nor in St. Petersburg was there any talk about music, but of course we can talk about it only in relation to the years after 1916, since what came earlier is really unknown to us. And that's an interesting observation, isn't it? That, as I say, this book by Joseph Azizi speaks definitively about the different chapters of the Gurdjieff work and teaching, and how he would use various methods to impart his teaching. And as Thomas de Hartmann is saying there, it's only 1918, 1919 when Gurdjieff begins to speak about music. And of course he must have always known about music, right? He didn't learn about music very quickly and then start sharing it. He would always have known about music and sort of kept it in, not shared the music, not shared the dances. All that time with Ouspensky in Russia, Moscow and St. Petersburg, it was sort of psychological and cosmological and metaphysical, the teachings, the diagrams and everything. And then when they left Russia because of the revolution, we can already feel, if you've read In Search of the Miraculous, we can already feel that the teaching method and style is beginning to change. One morning I went into the street and to my surprise saw my friend Zakharov and Madame Bashmakova, a middle-aged lady from the Petersburg group, approaching our house. They were followed by some unfamiliar people who, I now discovered, were from Mr. Gurdjieff's group in Moscow. Among them was Alexander Nikanorovich Petrov, one of the chief pupils there. Physically, he was like a healthy young bull, and as I came to learn, he had a very intelligent mind and was highly gifted in mathematics and engineering. That evening, we all gathered in one of the rooms of the new house, and Mr. Gurdjieff said, "Nika Norwich, give us a lecture." And Petrov, without any preparation, spoke on the theme that one has to enter with all one's being into the work. He was a wonderful lecturer with a clear, distinct voice that was just as effective in a big hall as in a small room, and his speech flowed logically, without hesitation. Now, some more words from Olga de Hartmann. It was generally in the evening that Mr. Gurdjieff himself would speak to us and give us tasks. Already one of the rooms was called Mr. Gurdjieff's room. It had a carpet where we all learned to sit cross-legged in the Eastern way, while he sat on a sofa, also cross-legged. After a while, other carpets began to appear on the walls around us, and the room took on the aspect that Mr. Gurdjieff's rooms generally had, always covered with carpets. But in the beginning there was only one carpet and one sofa, and in the pupils' rooms a bed and a chair, nothing more. From the very beginning the conversations related to attention. Mr. Gurdjieff told us very seriously that attention is absolutely indispensable for any work we wish to do with him. If we did not understand that, nothing could bring us to the aim for which we came to him. All of us there already felt that we were more than just the body. We knew that something else was in us, and we wished to know, what is that? What have we to do with that? How can we call to it? How can we bring it out? How can we rely on it and not depend only on the body? All this was really a burning question for us, and Mr. Gurdjieff made it clear that if we didn't study attention, not study in the ordinary way, but putting all our attention on developing that attention, we would arrive nowhere. For this he gave us exercises at every moment. All the next day we had our task where attention had the central place, whether it was in the kitchen or the garden or with the horses when they appeared. Mr. Gurdjieff planned everything that went on in the house, and nothing could occur without him knowing it, seeing it, or being all the time present. Now back to Thomas. We rose early, had tea, and each person was given a pound of bread for the day. About 1 o'clock we had lunch. There were little tables on the terrace, 4 chairs at each, with coloured tablecloths, each place, set with knife, fork and spoon, napkin, no such thing. On each table was a single deep earthenware bowl. Everyone had a wooden spoon, and all 4 at the table ate from the common dish. The menu was as follows: a savoury borscht, or some other thick soup with vegetables, followed by a large piece of meat for each of us, with potatoes and beans or another vegetable. In the evening we had tea with the remaining bread. At that time, although my wife and I lived in our little house, Mr. Gurdjieff asked us to have our meals with the others. It was terrible for my wife, who simply could not eat from the same dish with other people. I do not know how she arranged it, but Mr. Gurdjieff allowed her to have her own plate. He probably did not wish to press her too hard, as other difficulties were in store. One day I began to eat slowly and consciously, as described in some books I had read before meeting Mr. Gurdjieff. Pondering on the physical process of the transformation of food and how it ordinarily cannot serve its highest end, and on what was said about evolution, I had persuaded myself of the necessity of conscious eating. In many religions, prayers before meals are to remind us of this need. I had taken only 4 spoonfuls slowly and consciously before the common dish was empty. Mr. Gurdjieff usually walked among the tables when we ate, noticing everything. On this occasion he stopped by my side and said only, "So, Thomas, so." Mr. Gurdjieff used to say, man should eat, not as an animal, but consciously. I think he meant by it that we should not identify with food, as always happens when a hungry person finally reaches it. I can still see him vividly sitting in an armchair, his muscles completely relaxed as always, the whole weight of his body submerged in the depths of his chair. Slowly he lifts to his mouth a very good pear, not peeled. Unhurried, he takes a bite of it, as if striving to absorb its entire aroma, its entire taste, and so he continues until it is finished. I was able to watch his way of eating many times. It always seemed to me that he was demonstrating how we should eat. Soon after the Moscow people arrived, Mr. Gurdjieff began to make heavy demands on some of them. We often did not understand, but the explanation can be found in the fundamental principle of the work of this second period: to try to stay with him in spite of all obstacles, and to remember why we came. He often said that in life, great unhappiness or even insults can move people forward. On the way we were following, the teacher deliberately contrived such insults, but, under his observation, they cannot bring objective harm to those he is working with. Where Gurdjieff is, there the fleas do not bite, he said, meaning that the blows of fate through everyday adversities do not touch the one who is working with him. In our case, the suffering was intentional to test our resolve to hold to our aim, and the more the person was advanced, the more Mr. Gurdjieff would press him. At Uk there, Mr. Gurdjieff had pressed Zakharov so strongly that he finally couldn't bear it any longer and left and went to Tuapse, where he passed through a serious illness. He went back to St. Petersburg, but had taken the first opportunity to return to us in the Caucasus. Here, new difficulties confronted him. Still weak as he was after his illness, Mr. Gurdjieff did not receive him tenderly and said he could not support him at the house. Zakharov had to move into a small room elsewhere in the neighborhood. When I dropped in to see him, he was lying on his bed fully dressed. He looked poorly, still not fully recuperated after his illness, and very depressed by everything that had happened. In 2 or 3 days, he was among us again. Earlier in the year, Mr. Gurdjieff had bought cheaply somewhere a huge bale of tangled, multicolored silk. It was a shrewd investment. Goods were now in short supply, and silk commanded a high price. Even before the arrival of the Moscow and Petersburg people, he had begun to disentangle it himself, working very quickly with great dexterity, often making me hold the skein between my 2 hands. Dr. Sternwohl was trying to do the same with the help of a chairback. After the others arrived, the work went faster, and soon many skeins were ready. From those skeins, the silk had to be wound on small paper tubes. We were all asked to bring all the white paper and pencils we could find. I said timidly that I had music paper of a rare size, which I intended to use for the orchestration of my ballet. I had given 1 quire of this paper to Prokofiev, who had come especially from Kislovodsk to get it from me. "Well then, why didn't you say so? Bring it here," said Mr. Gurdjieff. And this precious paper was at once cut into little squares, the squares wrapped around pencils, and the silk thread wound around the paper tubes. It was a tedious job, winding round and round. Everyone else was very patient, but I could not bear it. Whether I thought then about the way of a clever man, I do not know, but I decided to invent a winding machine when Mr. Gurdjieff was away. One of the pupils had been led to believe, naively, that Mr. Gurdjieff was going to conduct experiments in magic, perhaps even call forth planetary spirits. For this it was necessary to have frankincense, which the pupil had managed to obtain. He showed it to me in a little wooden box with a tight-fitting lid, just the thing for the flywheel of my future machine. I borrowed the box and found some thick wire in the cellar to serve for axle and handle. For a bobbin to hold the paper tube itself, I adapted a pencil with safety pins at both ends. The box and the bobbin revolved in holes punched in pieces of stiff cardboard fastened to a small board. With trepidation in my heart, I started to wind the first skein. The machine worked. splendidly. Just then Mr. Gurdjieff came into the house and caught sight of my factory. "Wiseacre," he said, "you always have to invent something." But the machine continued to work without interruption, and soon the tubes of silk were ready. One evening Mr. Gurdjieff brought in a large box that had many compartments and said to me, "So, Toma, go tomorrow to Kislovodsk and try to sell this silk." "But Georgy Ivanch," I answered, "Kislovodsk is filled with my Petersburg acquaintances. I cannot sell there." "On the contrary, so much the better. With so many acquaintances, you will sell the silk more quickly." So the next day I took the train to Kislovodsk. I arrived at dusk, but I did not go to my friends, who did not need silk thread, because I did not wish to start gossip. Under cover of darkness I went around to the little shops. Finally I entered a big one. It was the shop of our landlord, and to my great surprise I saw Mr. Gurdjieff standing there. The landlord bought a lot of silk, and then Mr. Gurdjieff said, "Now let's go home." What a relief. I will never forget this experience through which Mr. Gurdjieff hit another of my weaknesses. I had never before realized my almost insurmountable sense of class pride, which made me ashamed to sell the silk. At this time no one yet understood that everything in Russia was turning upside down. I realized what a wonderful lesson Mr. Gurdjieff had given me. Many people of my class were forced by circumstances to do similarly embarrassing things, but I had to accept it as a task and not under pressure of circumstances, and Mr. Gurdjieff never again sent me to sell silk in Kislovodsk. Marfusha and Osip had left their 2 children at home with his mother on our estate in the Ukraine. Since the revolution was spreading, Mr. Gurdjieff told us that it would be sensible to send our faithful servants home now, as later it might become impossible. With great sorrow we did so, sending as much money with them as we could. Soon Mr. Gurdjieff told us that he needed our little house, and suggested that it would be much better if we came to live in the big house. For me, accustomed as I was from childhood to living in common in the cadet corps and in military service, it was not such a terrible thing, even though my memories and associations of it were unpleasant. But for my wife, who was always accustomed to living together in a home of our own, however small it might be, such a move was very difficult. It was now clear to us that what Mr. Gurdjieff wanted was not our house, but that we ourselves should take part completely in the life of the big house. We accepted this, moving into one room on the upper floor, and gave up our little house to him. Mr. Gurdjieff changed the arrangement of the rooms quite often, and then all the furniture and carpets were carried up and down, and so much the worse for the person who had grown attached to his surroundings. And I think that's all for this evening. The next chapter that we'll probably read again on Sunday evening, chapter 5, is Forming the Institute. So we'll learn about the sacred dances and the piano music, and then goes on to the work deepens. And where do we head after that one? Facing the public. So the first public performance. But yes, fascinating stuff, and also a real insight into some of Gurdjieff's methods of evoking a response in people, like what we just read there at the very end. In the big house, before he got the priory in Fontainebleau, this big house in Essentuki, he'd constantly be changing the sleeping arrangements, the living arrangements around, and as Thomas de Hartmann says there, I'll get the quote so that I don't mess it up and paraphrase it. So much the worse for the person who had grown attached to his surroundings. So the pain, again, this is to do with identification and considering, and the lesson just there in those few words. The pain comes not from moving around a lot, from Mr. Gurdjieff saying, right, move all them chairs and this and that, move everywhere. the pain isn't from the actual moving around. The pain comes from the identification, from the attachment to the current living situation. So, of course, if someone is attached, then likely Gurdjieff would have moved them much more often to sort of help them to awaken to that thing in themselves, to observe it in themselves, the pain that comes from the identification. But that's all for this evening. Again, I've got some uploads coming this week, some historical perennial philosophies, Search and the Miraculous, a new letter from Maurice Nicoll on identification. So keep your eyes out for that, and much more to come. Like I say, I think after this, we'll read Czeslaw Czechowicz's Gurdjieff, A Master in Life. Again, another rare and powerful book from a Russian, Czeslaw Czechowicz. Then after that, I think we might get a bit more technical and go to either Walker, can't remember his first name, Matthew Walker, something Walker, or C.S. Knott has a series of books, and I'd quite like to read the C.S. Knott book, The Teachings of George Gurdjieff, or Mr. Gurdjieff. But there's lots to read, like I say, on the app, which you can find the link in the description. There are some historical readings from the previous channel, and you can go and listen to those right now. But here at the Four Ideals, we will continue to learn and read about Mr. Gurdjieff, to see that as an ideal, waking up, man number 5, 6 and 7, raising our being, raising our consciousness, how to do that in this modern day and age. But for now, I'll say thanks everyone for joining. It's so lovely to see you all and to connect. Have a great rest of the week, and we'll be around at the weekend for another reading. And before we go, Sophia has commented, so I'll read that and then say farewell. Sophia says, Gurdjieff creates family around himself, always being present and bringing others present with him. He certainly does. And again, you can imagine the community life, the family, nature, and the wonderful energy and vibrations and environment that would have been there, right, Sophia? Because of Gurdjieff, he's making the conditions for them to work. So, yes, thanks for sharing that, Sophia. And David, see you later. Everyone, have a great week. Look after yourselves, take care, and I will see you next time. Bye now.